welcome back to the Bob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Maaret Pyhäjärvi, and we are going to talk about teaching in ensemble, exploratory testing, and product development in practice. But before we get started, maybe Maaret, you could introduce yourself and talk about why you're interested in ensembling, etc.
So I've always been a bit of a social learner. I have my 25th anniversary in IT industry this year, and I've been facilitating communities pretty much since I started in the industry, because it's the best way to learn from others. And when I got the chance of inviting Woody Zuil to a conference and got introduced to this, I thought it was such a ridiculous idea that I had to try it. And I realized it's one of the best things that I could have ever done to, really build on top of the whatever I had on learning socially. So I'm still on that journey, and it continues.
Great. And so that leads very well into teaching in ensembles. So what experiences have you had there? Successes, anything along those lines?
So my regular work is that I'm a principal test engineer in Vaisala, which basically means I work in projects. And I do very little teaching. I kind of do pairing and ensembling as part of the work. But as my hobby on the side, I've been teaching a lot of people pretty much across the globe, kind of going to conferences and organizing different kind of sessions. And this whole teaching stuff, it's more on the hobby side for me rather than my work. And again, for me, I've been trying to teach, well, you probably know this, that I'm kind of keen on testing. Testing is my thing. It's the number one thing that I really care for. And it's hard to teach testing by just telling stories about testing that has happened at some point. You actually have to experience it. And I used to do that in pairs. And as a teacher, I always had this trouble that you got lucky if you got a good pair. And if you didn't get a good pair, I had absolutely no control over what the people were taking out of the course that I was facilitating. Like, I could mix up the pairs, of course, like do a bit of promiscuous pairing during that day, but it was still kind of lucky. And again, then there was always this kind of reintroducing and where did the previous pair leave off and a lot of that stuff. So when I found that I can use ensembling as a way of teaching, I've been really doing a lot better in ramping up people's skills, especially in exploratory testing, which seems to be something that people really do not get how to do.
Yeah, and so that's really interesting. And also, I think that there's also this dynamic where two maybe student role people end up talking to each other about their understanding and correcting it. And you, as a trainer, you don't need to re-explain something to somebody. They begin to explain it to each other. And so I've seen a lot of benefits like that for sure. Exploratory testing in that, and actually, I think just training in that in general, how are things introduced? How maybe how does it go along? Have people been resistant to this style of teaching, or has it been better for you?
So I've tried various framings on how to introduce this. I've tried creating kind of like the whole outline of the course already introduces that we're going to be learning in this style. And if people know it in advance, they generally run away. They're afraid of the description. They don't know what it is. It's unknown, and they just opt out. Like if the course is called Ensemble Exploratory Testing or something like that, they won't join. But if it's just exploratory testing and we just happen to be mostly spending our time in an ensemble, it really doesn't matter at all in that point. And again, you can always have these rules of kind of like, if you don't want to be, on the driver's seat for now, you can opt out. You can say kind of like just pass, and we're okay with that. If you don't know what to do, it's not your job to know. You're here to learn. So it's always my responsibility in the end that they get the task done. And then kind of just framing it with good examples of tasks, something that will stretch them in a way that kind of layers the learning. It's generally an enjoyable experience. That's at least how I've been finding it.
Great. And is this like over multiple days, or is it a single day thing? Or
most of the things that I do are well, right now at my work, I've been running a Python for testing course. It's 4 times half a day.
Okay.
Because it's less exhausting that way when you can split it
Yeah.
over multiple weeks. We've been doing it every second week. So it's kind of like you practice something in a group, then you get some home exercise, or kind of like, we ask you to either apply it in your work or do an exercise that we gave you. And then we continue again after 2 weeks. That's kind of nice because, well, we're all in the same company and we can build the schedules the way we like. But most of the time, it's either a full day because I'm an external trainer and I'm away from my regular work. So it's either a full day, or at most it's usually been 2 days when we've been spending time together. And then it's kind of like whether the exercises are, well, it might be that it's different systems that will reveal you different things about testing, or it might be that it's the same system and we're just, for 2 days we're digging in and growing our understanding, and those create completely different experiences, of course. But 2 days is kind of my max on training side.
And so I like this idea of the exploratory testing piece, and because I do think that, in a lot of the extreme programming side of things, there's a lot of this kind of test up front, and exploratory testing, I always find it's like, we'll catch that super like esoteric stuff. And so, I think that probably unique to this episode is the discussion on exploratory testing in Ensemble. Maybe can you describe anything that might be unique about that experience compared to maybe a ensemble programming experience that people might have?
I think the main difference kind of comes from the fact that it's really it's an act of discovery, like completely. It's about just the learning, and the software there. It's there to be your kind of like, I think of it as like an external imagination. So it's there to pique your curiosity and drive you to certain directions, and kind of ask you to listen to it and follow wherever it's taking you, and ensuring that we create this understanding in the group that we didn't maybe have before. So again, like, of course, we do this while we're programming as well, or we could be doing test automation in an ensemble, and then it's exactly the same as programming in general. But it's more on the side of kind of like when you're learning and you're taking these like small loops of how you are adding more information in a group, and you're trying to keep the group in sync of what we're doing now, so that it doesn't end up being kind of like a sample of some of your work and some of your work and then somebody else's work. Kind of creating these learning agendas, well, we call them charters usually in exploratory testing. That's, I think, what makes it a little bit different, kind of like deciding what kind of things you're doing. I usually use kind of techniques, for example, naming things that you see is really great technique, and trying to put that into a mind map and then reorganizing that into some kind of a model, and then pointing out that do you notice that you have an empty space here in this model, you haven't filled that out, or that you have found a lot of detail here, but maybe that there's still another layer that you can peel. So the visual representation of the knowledge usually helps in that. But yeah, it's generally, it's just a little bit different in the sense that you have a lot more leeway on what you're doing, and you're trying to still keep that learning in some kind of a leash, so that you don't end up doing too many things at once.
Nice, yeah. We've traditionally used in our ensembles Kanban and whiteboards, but someone on the team suggested mind maps recently, so we used that for a while, and that was a lot of fun, and it worked really well. One question I had was, I suspect you were teaching exploratory testing before you started ensembling, and if you did, how did you teach it then compared to now? Like, what's some of the big differences you've seen?
I taught it before. At first I taught it by telling stories about how testing works in companies, and that just doesn't work at all. Then I taught it in pairs. And that creates the problem that if I'm actually the only one in the whole group who really knows how to do it, I can't model it for every one of the groups. I get to the level of best in the group rather than my level. And with Ensemble, I can really say kind of like, hey, now let me navigate for a while. I'll show you how to do this. And then I can make them kind of do it what I consider more of the right way. And then I can let them build things. And again, I've learned better ways of doing the thing, but I've needed to kind of baseline it on like, maybe you should try this one. And then people can do this kind of like, oh yeah, and we could do this and, we can add that. So it's more on the side of making sure, kind of getting the best out of everyone, including the trainer. There's a reason why the trainer is the trainer, generally because they're trying to teach something to the group.
Yeah. Fantastic. And that's what I was going to say as well is in our practice of ensembling. So we'll be ensembling code, but a natural part of ensembling code is to do some exploratory testing as well. And that's what I love about having someone like yourself or someone like-minded in the quality mindset. It'll just be like, oh, the tests, the unit tests pass and that's great, but let's do some exploratory testing, right? And so what I've seen that's fantastic with that, with an ensemble is the knowledge of the group helps tremendously, right? Because someone is thinking about it from a database or persistence perspective. Someone's thinking about it from a domain perspective, what a user would do. Someone else thinking about it. So you come up with all these test cases that I think back to my days prior to pairing and ensembling that I would never thought of, right? And so it's you find some fantastic things that way that I don't think I could compare to anything else other than maybe a meeting, like someone says something like, oh, let me go back to my desk and test that now,
It's kind of this accidental learning by being really intentional about learning. So you just kind of go in with the idea that you're learning and you don't know what you will learn. The whole unknown unknowns is kind of the central concept in testing. We never know how things will end up working, and that's what we want to discover. There's one bit that I, by the way, wanted to mention is that we always keep talking about this kind of we do TDD and we do maybe some kind of test automation work, and then we do exploratory testing on top of that. That's not actually how I think of exploratory testing. Okay. I have this idea of contemporary exploratory testing where test automation and kind of like all of those more short leash activities are kind of, I frame them in this whole concept of learning. So I might do what I call kind of automationist Gambit for exploratory testing. So I actually start by taking test automation. It might be unit level test automation, it might be API, or it might be user interface. But when I create the basic scenarios with automation while I'm exploring, I kind of choose that as one of my short leashes that I use while I'm exploring. It allows me to then build on top of that. And again, since it's an open-ended discovery of information, it doesn't really end in the end of having done that. You can build on top of that, and it can be a really useful way of getting some testing done that you wouldn't get done otherwise. And this is something that I also nowadays teach to a lot of people, complete newbies to programming. And within a couple of hours in an ensemble format, they are actually programming for testing purposes, usually on the user interface level. And that is still exploratory testing. It's not separate from exploratory testing, but it is exactly that type of work.
How does that work, maybe from like a implementation standpoint? Is it you're running a automated interface test all the way to a certain step and then doing something unexpected afterwards? Or what do you do to use it as a short leash, as you're saying?
So usually when I teach, the first thing that I start with is that I have a very simple web user interface based application. It has a field and a button and some outputs, like really, really simple one, as simple as they come. And then what I guide people into is thinking about, so we had this one scenario, you wrote here to be or not to be. And it counted how many be verbs you had on that sentence. So what else could you be writing here? Instead of writing it kind of, manually, as in you write it on the user interface, you can use the automation, just kind of give a list of all kinds of things to try, and then have different expected values. And then notice the things that the automation notices for you, kind of, which is out of order for that application, and then notice the things that automation doesn't, for example, notice for you. So I demo then people to things like, well, you thought, you did these 20, 30 test cases now, and you found these, multiple problems with your automation while you were exploring with automation. But there's still these problems you didn't find. For example, I introduced accidentally originally, I introduced a bug in that application that I have on the CSS side. Instead of having the relational position, I have fixed position, which means it doesn't scroll. So if you create long text, automation script really sees the long text completely, and all the counting of words and counting of to be verbs are, all of that is fine. It seems as if it was working. But if you try touching the user interface, which you can obviously also do, you can kind of run the automation script to a certain point and then continue, you will notice different things. And then you end up kind of like, do I want to implement more on the algorithm side? Do I want to extend the automation to notice all of this? Or is it enough that I noticed it now and I have the baseline already in automation, and maybe that's what I want to keep for later? So I get to this kind of concept of some of the automation that we write is single use. I throw it away. And some of it is stuff that we will build on, and maybe even clean it up so that we put it in the CI pipeline, and it makes sense to keep around there.
So the dry principle is preserved. Kind of, you don't repeat yourself. You just expand on variations, whether it be just the test variations or later adding new bits of code to try and touch the interface somewhere that it can't actually be reached or something. Yeah, that makes sense.
And again, like parallelizing this as well. Like you do repeat yourself. You actually want to repeat yourself when you're running things on multiple different threads at the same time. But there's again a new information that you're looking for, an idea that you want to kind of test for, and getting people to kind of think of like, what do we know and what we don't know, and how do we build on top of what we know? I think that's the challenge of exploratory testing.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that was a good point you made earlier. I think I did at a conference once one exploratory testing, like training session, and it was purely manual testing. But I think you make it a great point that it doesn't have to be just manual. It's exploratory is more of the mindset you're going in when you're testing. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not my area of expertise. But and I love the description you have, the interplay between automation and manual, because in my experience with ensembles, it does kind of go to that back and forth. Someone has an idea, it might start with the manual test, but if we do find something that immediately turns into some kind of automation to as Chris would say, vice test it, wrap that bug and make sure we get a red test for that so we can fix it. Or the other way around, we're writing some automation and it makes us think of something, oh, well, what about this case at the hardware level or the firmware level? And then it might cause us to do some exploratory testing manually. And so I've definitely seen the interplay back and forth, and that seems very healthy, right? Because you want all the tools available for whatever you need at that moment, right? So that's great. And just to get real specific, just out of curiosity, what kinds of automation tools do you typically start with a group? For test automation?
In a training session, when I first started experimenting with this, I used robot framework a lot. Oh, yeah. I had this idea that it looks very English-like and that makes it easy for people. And then I noticed that what happens if I do that is that people leave the session completely forgetting that they were learning exploratory testing or that they were learning testing in general, and they're just excited about the new language and that they can write now some automation in a language that it's kind of like a box. It's really good to begin with. It's really beginner friendly. But also when you start with that, I feel like you get trapped in that box. Like you can't really get out of it anymore. So one of the things that I'm kind of noticing in the community in general is that in Finland, we have like a lot of people who are robot framework experts, which basically means they don't know how to test, they don't know how to automate, and I think they're out of job at some point. But the developers will be doing actually better job in both of those roles, because the automation takes so much of their effort, so that they no longer test, but they just automate, but they're stuck on a language that no one else wants to use. So that's kind of my concern. The box is very rigid. So then I replaced it with just taking Python and PyTest. And I can take whatever tools I want and need on top of that. And more recently, I've been really looking at kind of like having very basic Python tests using Playwright, which is kind of one of the more friendly, easy APIs on the user interface side on top of that. And then using, requests for driving REST APIs, using something for files, like combining things and layering kind of different libraries and introducing the idea that, even asserts, you can have, asserts, you can have, soft asserts come from a different library, you can have approval tests, they come again from a different library, you can have hypotheses, again, a different library, and you can just mix all of these and you don't have to get stuck in that so-called box that a single kind of like tool creates. So I try to remember, I try to choose my tools so that they enable learning and growing, and especially people who are a little bit afraid of that kind of programming oriented learning already. The limits of the box, even though they keep them safe in the beginning, they actually also imprison them in some way. But that's at least like my observation. And well, there's probably as many experiences as there are people, but that's what I've been noticing when I watch people try to grow out of robot framework.
Gotcha. And I feel like, I think that leap for testers, because I made that at one point in my journey, because I started more on the analysis and test side and then kind of leapt more into programming in my career. I think the ensemble is a safe place to learn that kind of thing, right? Because to, by myself, open up a language I've never seen before with tools I've never seen before would feel pretty daunting, right? And so to do that as an ensemble is pretty great. And and it was just, I was at an open space session the other day where I was, someone loved Python and wanted to do a dojo in Python, and we ended up opening up Cucumber. But the ability to teach like, oh, here's the feature files and the connections to the step files and all these things, to teach that in an ensemble was way easier than I remember because I had to learn that by myself, now that I remember right. Yeah, so so that really, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, like some of the things, again, I one of my favorite things to do as well, in addition to all of the other things I do, is to teach either kids or generally women over 40 changing into IT. That's my kind of like audience. I really want to spend some time on helping some of those folks change careers into testing. And when they start with automation, the IDE and the language, they're really kind of like putting those two together with all the error messages and everything that doesn't make sense. It's a really daunting experience. But when you have someone who kind of like, looks at the error messages with you and they explain them to you, and when your debugger doesn't work, you just, share your screen, remote work is now what we do a lot. You just share your screen and the group learns to help one another when you have, multiple people, so that the trainer can kind of just, take steps back and just admire how some people are now helping others figure out how did we do this, and you reiterate and you repeat. You get over the hurdle that so many people stop on. And there's still a lot of people in the testing community that kind of say that, they don't do, like I said earlier, I've been on video saying this, that the reason why I don't program is that there's so much other things to do that I don't really care about that. There's plenty of people who seem to care about that programming stuff already. So you don't really need me there, whereas you need me on this other exploratory stuff. But then realizing that when I bridge that gap and kind of like, I get over the hurdle of learning programming, or actually relearning, because I've been doing that since 12, 13, I think I was when I started, kind of, I needed to just remember some of the stuff that I had rewritten out of my memory. So realizing that, it's not away from me, it's actually adding to that. And that was kind of a big deal. But there's still a lot of people who are saying that they don't want to program. That's not something that they want. And I remember when I started ensemble programming first, that was what I said, like, I'm only doing this because I want the programmers in my team to learn from one another. And I might have to, be in the room to hold the space for them. But I'm going to hate it. I'm going to hate every minute of it. And it wasn't that enjoyable at first, but then kind of realizing that, hey, I'm not as lost as I thought, and I can just as well learn this, and kind of like, almost like language hunting type of thing, like noticing bits and pieces and connections. And then I realized, I was talking to this one psychologist guy when I was looking for a new job. He told me that the phenomenon that I was describing, kind of like the feelings, it's called cognitive dissonance. When you're doing something that you believe is bad, you will rewrite, you either will stop doing it or you will rewrite your own ideas that it's not bad to do it. And I kept doing that for, several weeks and weeks, regularly going back to practice. And it was kind of funny noticing that, I don't recognize myself. So I think this happens also a lot for people who are learning and kind of trying out new things.
Yeah, and the ensemble will help bridge the gap for sure. There was something that you mentioned earlier around the mind maps, and I just kind of wrote a note, and I'm curious about. So when in an ensemble, and you're mind mapping a scenario, do you see a tendency to balance out breadth versus depth on an idea? Because I think we were talking about maybe we've explored very far over here and very little over here. And so I'm just curious, like, are there any side effects that you see of doing the mind map? How do people change their decisions when in a group looking at a mind map about something that they're trying to accomplish?
So at least we have more conversations about, is it going to be depth or breadth? So there's a little bit more intention in that. So a lot of times people think they've already gone very deep and they haven't even scratched the surface. So there's this one bit in one application, like I use kind of open source software to as test targets. They're realistic, bigger systems, and they're too big usually to test in one go. And there are things that people don't know. I don't know them. I haven't created them. It's not, they are not my programming projects. They're general systems, kind of like what we get when we work as testers in teams, that, someone else creates a lot of that stuff. You are kind of part of it, but maybe you don't know all of the bits and pieces. So we have this like one corner of the application where there's like a list of things that you can create, and there's 4 buttons under the list. And I ask people just to give names for the buttons and give names for all the features they see in the list. And they kind of like, they say they see the box, they see the 4 buttons, we're done. And I'm like, well, what can you do with the list? Well, we can't do anything with the list. Like they try clicking it and no, nothing happens. Like, okay, I can select it. So let's call it select. So what can you do after you've selected? But I can't do anything. And then they realize that there's hidden functionality, kind of like you have to click on a particular style, and then you are able to edit the text. It's by no means visible, and it's not actually the most common pattern of getting it to edit. There's no right-click menu, which you would expect to see. But like when you kind of, you go through layer by layer and you find something of some kind, you can use that as a source of other ideas of similar kind. And it has like a lot of functionality, like maybe 50 things get listed. So it's a tiny box. I just kind of like say to people, like, we just stay on this tiny box. I only care about this box. Undo, redo is connected with that box. Like it's a treasure trove of problems in pretty much almost any program that you combine undo and redo with any of the functionality. So kind of like being more systematic and going really deeper. I think that's the more difficult thing for people. They see the kind of visible, easy landmark type of things, but then naming things that are somehow kind of under the surface, that's where you really need the guidance.
Nice. Yeah, I saw a ensemble-ish type session where someone was asked to exploratory test something, and several in the group were blown away when one person was going a total security route, like trying to do like SQL injection or, and that kind of thing too. So there's there's endless different ways to go. And what I love about the mind map and just drawing in drawing in general with an ensemble is, like Chris was saying, you could be going super deep in something that's not important, or hitting a lot of breadth and not hitting something important that's deep, and seeing it on the screen, it makes it really visualize, makes it much more obvious to a group. Oh, here we are on the map. Here's where we haven't been, or I just love that aspect of it. And another thing that you said earlier that triggered a question for me is you said ensembling with kids and things like that. And so that's something we've done quite a bit. I've ensembled with my own kids and middle school students, and we've ensembled with college students. And, it's funny, it was a point Chris was saying earlier that doesn't happen with other styles of teaching, is that in an ensemble, even the kids will teach themselves. So my daughter was teaching in an ensemble, my boys, how to do something in the code, and that was pretty fun to see. What have your experiences been like teaching? What were the groups? You said kids and then something else?
Kids and women over 40.
Cool. Yeah. So tell us about that. What are your experiences there?
So it's a little funny in the sense that there's so much similarity of teaching these two beginner groups. For example, one of the things I do with those groups is I don't talk about drivers and navigators. I talk about hands and brains and voices, because they already understand that, brains make decisions, hands, follow the decisions made by brains, and voices, sometimes they actually disturb the brain and they should be behaving when their voices. So kind of like, using these kind of concepts, make it a little bit kind of easier to grasp maybe. But the kids, well, I started with kids kind of because I have my own kids, and especially with girls, when you want to teach them something technical, they tend to need the social aspect of it, like every girl needs to be doing it, or some of them will tell that no girls do this. So I started with my daughter when she was 4, and I was teaching them programming so that, all girls of her age have been learning programming since they were 4. So I kind of, hijacked her whole friend group. So that's a big part of the interest. But also just kind of, going then to school and working with the teachers and sometimes kind of getting a group together. But I have had a limited time on the children's side. So I usually use it on, groups where my own kids are involved or will benefit from. And then on the adult side, I do that kind of a side a lot more nowadays.
Nice. I really liked how you renamed or described driver navigator with different terms, because I think the first time I tried to explain it to my kids, they just kind of looked at me dumbfounded and were like, "Get out of here, Dad!" And then they just started, continuing to work without listening to my advice about how to ensemble.
I seem to be big on renaming things, because I renamed mob programming to ensemble programming. And I did the same with the driver navigator, now calling it hands and brains and voices. So again, like a lot of that comes from the fact that when your energy goes into explaining to people that this is not, mobbing gives you some kind of an idea, this is not that. And it goes into explaining to people that you can trust me and I'm friendly. When you could use a word that already says, trust me, I'm friendly, like I'd rather go that way. So I was kind of lucky 2 years ago when I started kind of deciding that I need to do something other than explain every single time. It's taking so much of my life. I then used some time on asking people for options. And this ensemble programming term came from Denise Yu, who proposed it, because obviously I go into the underrepresented groups when I ask for the words that they're comfortable with. So it's women in testing and women in programming who got the proposal, and then we worked on it on Twitter after.
Nice. So I want to make sure that we hit this other topic that we had lined up, which was product development in practice. So what did we want to say here before we close out?
On the product development in practice. So it's more on the side of, again, I've been a practitioner for 25 years. I've never been really a teacher. So even though we talk about teaching, that's a very small part of all the things I do. And again, kind of like trying to get teams to work out this is kind of the big thing that I do.
Nice. Yeah. So what does that look like for you? Yeah. So, you've talked a little bit about how you do your teaching things on the side. So when you're actually in practice at a workplace, how does that translate for you?
Well, I know that you have a very different experience. You get to ensemble full time, and your organization kind of like goes that direction. I have the benefit of some status in my organization. So when I say we get together for half a day or a full day and we do the real work in that style, people generally say yes to me nowadays. They didn't when I started. I needed to actually use all of my persuasion skills to get my first group to ever do ensemble programming with me. Like I eventually I learned that the thing that I needed to say is, I kind of need this personally. You seem to be liking me, so maybe you'll do me a favor. So kind of like a personal favor. And then they were okay sitting together for a couple of hours with me. And when that was kind of like a party, then they were okay with the next time. And I didn't need to beg as much as the first time. But ever since that time, it's really gone into the side of when I suggest it, people just kind of show up. I don't also explain what we're going to be doing. And it's just one of the things that we might be doing. And now, especially with the time of remote, it is so natural to kind of like have a group and say, you're explaining this. Maybe you can, open your screen and share your screen, and maybe we can look at it together. Because like you can have hour-long conversations of why isn't this working, and then the error messages, and they're somehow thinking you understand what they're doing versus kind of just going in that experience and just sharing screen and working for a while. So solving problems that way is a lot faster. But I think kind of this whole ensembling, it's just a small part of all the things that we end up doing. For me, it's more on the side of kind of thinking in terms of delivering. So I think my kind of specialty nowadays seems to be shortening the feedback loops, as in we used to release twice a year. Now we release maybe twice a month or twice a week, or eventually I hope twice a day. And whatever mechanism helps me grow people to that direction together with me, growing with them, of course. That's what I try to figure out.
Nice, fantastic. And that's what I love about ensembling in the workplace. And I think many of the origin stories, because it's kind of had roots in many different places, where it started in kind of like a learning teaching thing, but then it showed up in the workplace, is it really fits that culture of learning and experimentation that so many are seeking with DevOps or just great innovative cultures in general, where you're learning as you're working, right? Because then you're talking about feedback loops, right? So if you're learning something 6 hours ago, 3 days ago, and now you're trying to apply it to work, it's somewhat out of context, can still work, right? But what I love about it is that we learn together on the fly, as you're saying, like someone's having a problem. Oh, share your screen and let's learn together as we're working on it, whether it's speeding up tests or speeding up feedback or speeding up delivery and those kind of things. And so, I just love that, because in my experience, there's no better way to truly learn something than while you're doing it, right? Like the context is already loaded in there, and then it'll stick with you much better than many other styles of learning. But
I find that, I've been analyzing my own thoughts a lot. Like, this is something that you needed to do, but I needed to do so that I could become a better exploratory tester. And I noticed that I'm thinking kind of like everything in terms of everything has a tail. So for me, there is no such thing as the learning is done in the moment. There's always a tail. Like when we finish a feature and we put it in production, I know that it's going to take a while before the customers actually use it. And it's going to take a while before we meet them so that we can encourage them to show how they're failing or succeeding with that feature. So there's always that tail of kind of like, seeing it work in production in a particular way. Or there's a tail of kind of like growing from the moment of having a new product available to having 200 different IoT devices out there and seeing how it really behaves with 200 devices in real production environment, which has some of the factors that we knew that we couldn't control while we were testing it internally. So kind of like looking at the production time. So everything we think we're right now learning and everyone else is happy that they learned it now and, you know, it got resolved. For me, it was like, you know, it's a tale that I put on a list. And then I have these like, you know, a week later, I will come and think about it. A month later, I will come and think about it. And I have like, you know, different kinds of things. And nowadays, I can even like, you know, I see in front of me, I look at it and like, there's this tail. This tail has, you know, it's that shape. Kind of like, how often do I come back and revisit this? And I have these personal practices where, you know, I'm staring at the white wall just so that I can, you know, see the tails that are kind of, you know, I hold them in my head. And sometimes I need to put them on a post-it wall or, you know, just see them on a white empty board so that I can manage them. So for me, when I'm kind of thinking of myself as an exploratory tester, the learning never happens completely in the moment, but we try to understand what can happen with what kind of a time frame.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's Chris's move especially, right? You'll set a reminder a month from now, check, you know.
I have reminders that go all the way into 2050 and beyond for myself. So I have a delay queue on a Kanban board, and some are like, oh, come back to this a week later, 3 months from now, you know. And it's even stuff like, I'll have a better relationship with this person in 6 months. So bring this topic up in 6 months after we've had some time to just work together, and all kinds of things. It's kind of like in learning theory, there's this style of interleafing. And so, you know, when you're trying to learn something new, you might, you know, if you knew it on a flashcard, you'd wait a week and then bring it back. And if you still knew it in the flashcard, you'd wait, you know, months. And then if you got it wrong in months, then you'd put it back into your today and then move it out to a week. I find that, you know, I think very similarly, I find that like that same style of interleafing works really well, even with just thinking about a problem or a situation or a discussion you're going to have or whatever. So yeah, I like that.
And also, like, I'm kind of controlling the budget of how much of other people's time do I take for the things that I'm thinking. Like, I have a lot of bandwidth for thinking, it seems, compared to many others. So I have this idea of kind of like, you know, I like see this like a Kanban style work in progress box, kind of like if I ask for some kind of an improvement, I can't ask all the other improvements at the same time. And I need to show up for doing that one thing that I requested first. And a lot of my work is kind of built around the idea of saying something and seeing whether I need to follow that and with what kind of a cycle.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I operate very similarly, so that's interesting.
That's awesome.
Nice, yeah. And I think at one time we were ensembling and we wrote a time.
Oh yeah, I coined the term time bomb tests, which are basically a test that asserts that the current date is above a certain date. And so I especially like these for when certificates are going to expire and maybe there's no clear way, or maybe you just don't know what a decision is going to be made on open source framework, or you have a third party involved. You can always do this time bomb test. So even if you're off the project, a test that says, it's just a unit test that says, don't forget to look at the certificate expiration and make sure somebody took care of this. And it fails in the pipeline. And I know it sounds ridiculous,
that's
but
awesome. Actually, that's exactly what I need. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you want to bring the entire team to a halt, right? Be like,
yeah,
oh, why is the pipeline down?
It's emergency time. But so conditional tests that test on the status of the outside world. So it doesn't have to just be the date and time. It could be any other specific set of scenarios. But
we've used that for well, it depends on, really, for us it's depended on the framework that we use, but we've used it for kind of like people promising to fix a bug. So we have a test that notices the bug, And when there's a promise that we'll fix it this week, it starts failing next week if you didn't keep your promise.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been kind of like a shorter loop, but this whole kind of like certificate example, really kind of like very useful one. I need to use that one. I have hard time with some of those stuff.
There's an extrapolation of that actually, which is if you could have integration tests that talk to your HR platform, you could say, if this person no longer works here, don't forget to have the team watch this video, right? So that's like another one where it's like, if you offboard somebody and it's like months later and something needs to be done, then, you know, so you could tie into the HR platform, you could tie into the date and time, you know, the position of the planetary alignment, whatever.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that I think I've said it several times before, but whenever I get messages from Chris through the system, I'm always like, is this robot Chris or real Chris? Because some sort of script he's written at one time to message me or message the team on something. Yeah, good stuff. Well, we are starting to hit the end of our time box, but this has been fantastic. Is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close?
Well, mostly the idea that we can always continue the conversation on Twitter. So my DMs are open. I'm happy to have some conversations there. So I'm trying to figure this out, and I'm a social learner. So I'm usually consider things successful when I have new friends that I can learn with, and I would welcome that.
Yeah, definitely. And I can attest to that. I've learned a lot from following you on social media. So call action to follow Maaret and learn. And yeah, to our audience, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. Please feedback on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and more. And if this really resonates with you, you know someone else that can potentially help, whether it's teaching an ensemble, exploratory testing, and you know, kind of applying some of these things in practice, yeah, please share it with them. But otherwise, have a good one, everybody, and talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.